that was back in October and November, and then a partial government shutdown that happened kind of over this past weekend. But with the most of the appropriations bills going through, we see steady funding for defense and for national security space. The top line for the Space Force ended up being $26.1 billion.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. Selfies, healthies, welfies, but likely not belfies from space are now NASA approved. On Wednesday, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman announced that going forward, NASA astronauts will be taking the latest smartphones to space. This change in policy will officially take off this month when the NASA SpaceX Crew 12 mission launches to the International Space Station on Wednesday, February 11th, weather permitting. Speaking of SpaceX, did you hear about the massive merger between Elon Musk's space company, SpaceX, and his AI company, xAI? CNBC is reporting that this private deal is the largest merger of all time. The newly combined company, the private company, values itself, which means this is not really an objective valuation, but nevertheless, SpaceX is now claiming that with this merger, it is worth $1.25 trillion. And here's the math. SpaceX's valuation wizards claim that SpaceX is worth $1 trillion and that xAI is worth $250 billion, which is weird because during a funding round last month, xAI was valued at $230 billion. So $20 billion of value just magically appeared. But if any of you have been on Musk's social media platform X, you will have encountered the Grok AI chatbot interface. xAI powers that. The Pentagon started integrating xAI's Grok into its unclassified systems starting in January. The cost to taxpayers? Allegedly 42 cents. Yes, I did just say 42 cents, and that's according to the U.S. General Services Administration. But it should also be noted that Grok, and therefore xAI, are being investigated by Australia, Brazil, Canada, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and European governments for allegedly creating deepfake explicit imagery of women and children. This merger is also interesting because many on Wall Street anticipate that Musk will take SpaceX public before the end of the year for what could be the largest listing ever. And speaking of big money, Congress just passed and President Donald Trump just signed a minibus federal funding bill, which included the 2026 budget for the Department of Defense and therefore the Space Force. To explain what it means, we've got Steve Jordan Tomaszewski, the Vice President of Space Systems at the Aerospace Industries Association. But before that conversation, we have the distinct pleasure of speaking with U.S. Air Force Brigadier General retired Damon Feltman. He's taking over the reins of the Space Force Association from Air Force Colonel retired Bill callsign hippie Wolf. Here's my conversation with Damon. Hey, Damon. Welcome to the Downlink podcast.
Hello, Laura. How are you?
I'm great, and I am so happy that you have finally come onto the podcast. And
It's about time.
No kidding. And I'm also really happy because congratulations are in order, right? Because you have taken over the reins of the Space Force Association. So, when did that happen?
Yeah, so my name is Damon Feltman, and as of this past weekend, February 1st, 2026, I became the CEO of the Space Force Association.
And we also should really send a shout out to Bill Hippie Wolf and his merry team for putting the association on the footing that it's on today. Because didn't he start this back in 2019 or something? Was it 2018? I can't remember.
It was 2019. Yeah. So the Space Force Association predates the Space Force by a couple of months, which is kind of interesting. Bill, a longtime friend of mine, and he kind of saw the writing on the wall. This was in the era when U.S. Space Command was being debated, and we weren't quite sure if the Space Force was going to go or if it was going to be a Space Corps or something like that. But Bill's vision was there needs to be an organization that advocates for the space mission, the Title X space mission inside of the Department of Defense, what was then the Air Force, and advocate for a distinct space service.
And advocate for space professionals.
Advocate for space professionals. So if I can give you a little bit of a background on SFA, what it is. SFA, for those who don't know, Space Force Association is a 501c3 nonprofit and recognized national military association that supports and advocates for the Space Force, its guardians, and the concept of U.S.-led security in space. So that's the short version of who SFA is.
Right. And seeing that you're now the just brand shiny, spanking new CEO, and you are also the president of the Space Force Association's Huntsville, aka Rocket City chapter. Hey, what do you do as the CEO? Like, what's your responsibility? What have you signed up for, Damon?
So I was the president, the chapter president in Huntsville. So when I retired on the military side and relocated to Huntsville, Bill asked me to help establish the chapter here in the Rocket City, and did that for about 18 months. And we did a fantastic job. I say we because it really was a team sport. A lot of folks here helped me create the organization, and that led to me coming on as the chief operating officer for a short period of time for SFA, and then finally the CEO. So at a macro level, the CEO is in charge of the entire organization. What that really means is we have a small staff of full-time employees. We have a couple of hundred of what I would call key volunteers. These are the people who run our chapters. They help us organize certain activities like our education activities, education outreach activities, what we do with respect to legislative affairs, how we build out certain programs, those types of things. So we have this core cadre of volunteers that help me execute the Space Force Association mission. So I do those things as the CEO and help grow the organization and support the Space Force, its guardians, and space power as a concept.
And a big, huge part of that happens to be the Space Power Conference, which all of you out there who listen to this podcast on a regular basis, you have heard at least 3 episodes from the Space Power Conference. I think the Space Power Conference, the first one, the inaugural one, was in 2023?
23. So, this past year was in December of 2025. That was our 3rd event. The first one was an interesting activity. The urban legend is that Space Force and Space Force Association were talking about needing a unique conference, and the green light was given like in July, and we executed the first conference in December of that year. And to borrow your phrase, it was cute.
It was cute. It was cute. It was great. I actually really, well, I hate to say it, but I kind of preferred it because you had the conference rooms, right?
Yeah.
And then like, I don't know, a stone's throw away in the same hotel right there in the atrium was the bar. And, everybody at the end of the day, after getting really, really smart on space power issues and stuff like that, we could all just go, okay, we've had a really hard day of thinking about, the United States, defense of the homeland and space systems. And now it's time to have a margarita. So, I liked it there. But you guys grew up and became all professional.
A little bit.
And are now, down the way a bit at the Hilton, which is a beautiful location to have the conference. And the conference has grown exponentially.
Yeah. So this past year, we had about 3,000 attendees, 1,000 of whom were guardians. So visually, that was fantastic. That as you looked out across the body of people that were there, you could really tell that the Guardians were there in force, and this is a conference for them as much as it is for industry and public consumption.
Oh,
So
space nerdtastic.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and we'll have our follow-on conference. The 2026 conference will be in the same location, so the Orlando Hilton, the first week of December of this year.
And I hope Hilton is paying us to say their brand name.
Yeah.
All right. So, hey, man, right. You are now the CEO. What is it? 3 days now, 4 days now.
Something like that.
What's your plan for the first 12 months? And I know that you are hitting the ground running because you're able to, because you're already part of it and you're already part of the leadership of it, but now you are the leader of it. So yeah. What do you want to get done?
I would frame it kind of in two pieces. The first part is just an overarching philosophy, and that's going from startup to scaling. So you've hinted at this a little bit before, even in this podcast we're in right now, that SFA is 6 years old. And like any startup, particularly a nonprofit startup, your first couple of years are,
Bootstrapping.
Scratching out just basic existence. And over the past, say, 18 to 24 months, the association has started to get its legs underneath it. It's gotten some stability to it. And so now we've grown memberships, we've grown sponsorships and some of our activities. It's time to take the next kind of major iteration of the organization and scale it. So fix some of the things that need to get fixed with a vision towards scaling. So that's the overarching strategy or the overarching vision. That vision is aligned to a strategy document that I helped write last fall. I won't go through all the nuances of that unless you want me to. But
we can find it on the website, right?
Yeah.
So I think the thing that's really important, though, is with the mission of the SFA, that it really focuses on guardians, and advocating for guardians as well as for space power. You know, how about for them? What do you think that they're going to see in the next 12 months?
I think what they'll see is a couple of things. Number one, our chapters are the channel by which we have the most direct contact with guardians and with the community. So it's easy to grow a chapter in a place like Colorado Springs or DC, where you have a gravity of guardians already. Huntsville was easy to grow a chapter because it's a space-centric city. But there are places that have a interest in the Space Force. They might not have a large population of guardians, but there's a community interest and an industrial interest. So making sure we grow our chapters smartly, making sure those people who lead those chapters understand the Space Force and its mission and can speak to those things, that's a key piece of what we are focusing on. It's really starting this year. I've had several meetings already on how to, kind of get that going. But over the next year, there'll be some transformation of how we onboard chapters. And then, by the time we're, say, 3 years into this, the chapter apparatus will be a lot stronger and a lot more visible and prominent in what we do in our daily activities.
Well, you just mentioned 3 years, right? So if we're to take this foundation and all these different chapters, and all these different chapters also offer opportunity to interact with the general population, as well as to interact with municipal or county or state government. What do you hope to accomplish, say, over the next 3 years? Like, what's the grand goal for Damon Feltman?
Yeah. Thank you for that. That is a powerful question, because number one, success is more than just number of members in the Space Power Conference. Those are indicators. What I really hope to accomplish is that the Space Force Association is more deeply rooted, that people see us as a trusted organization, the go-to organization when it comes to a dialogue about the Space Force and about U.S.-led space power. But specifically, if you were at our Space Power Conference in December, you heard Bill announce a concept called the National Space Power Center. That is a key piece of our strategy. I'm not waiting until year 3 to start it. It's starting like right now. But by year 3, it will be a fully functioning entity of the Space Force Association. But this is where we will have a physical presence in DC, where we can help educate and advocate for the Space Force to policymakers, lawmakers, in a way that is different than a classic think tank, where you might have a paper report or a PowerPoint briefing. The National Space Power Center will be built around immersive technology, physics-based models and simulation, digital engineering principles, so that when you talk about a space power principle or a thing that the Space Force is conversing about in its dialogue, you can come in and visualize it and see what it really means. The thing that I like to use as an example, last year, General Gutlein used the phrase dogfighting in space. We have a cognitive mindset of what that looks like from movies like Top Gun or any other type of like World War II movie, but dogfighting in space is a little bit differently. What does that really look like? So if I could bring in a policymaker and show it to them, team up with a commercial space domain awareness company and show them this, then maybe that would inform them on how to approach the strategic decisions that policymaker is about to make.
Or for the legislator that needs to
Absolutely.
figure out how much money to put at a particular program. All right. Well, we're getting to the end of our time, but there is something really important that we got to get after it, right? And you've got to address that Washington Times article because it seems to illustrate a sort of tension, maybe a schism-ish, like a friendly schism maybe, but a competition between the Air Force Association, which is now called the Air and Space Forces Association. It was rebranded in 2022, just for everybody to know, and they did that intentionally to try, and encompass the Department of the Air Force equities of being two service branches. But yeah, what is this like about? Is this like sort of a real dust up, or is this just like a storm in somebody's teacup?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying, number one, I'm a lifetime member of the Air Force Association. I grew up in the Air Force. I was doing the space missions of the Air Force.
You carry your card on you?
I don't carry it on me, but it is in my home office. So I can go produce it in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
So anyways, lifetime member of the Air Force Association. And I deeply believe that organization is an expert at advocating for U.S. air power, for U.S.-led air power. I would characterize the Washington Times article. There are plenty of things in there that are factual and accurate. I think it overplayed the schism angle. My personal experience with the AFA team there has been polite and professional in all activities. Some of them are, personal friends or prior coworkers, those types of things.
I have some of them on my podcast. I mean, Charles Galbraith has been really leading an effort to really broaden the associations, or rather the Mitchell Institute's study of space power, and to advocate for space power, actually. And
there's a thread of history that's worth realizing here, and it's not to poke anybody in the eyes. It's factual. So the Air Force Association came into existence right about the same time that the Department of the Army was debating how it should reorganize, and there were advocates for a separate Air Force. And so the Air Force Association chose not to be part of to advocate for itself underneath the Association of the U.S. Army. They advocated for themselves as an independent organization. So if you draw those parallels, I firmly believe, otherwise I would not have taken this job as the CEO of Space Force Association, that space is a unique domain. It has unique equities. There are constants of history that will be replicated inside of the Space Force. Many of those we inherited from the Air Force, but it is a distinct culture, a distinct capability, and it needs a voice that is fully unencumbered by other equities that may be out there. It's not to be impolite or poke anybody. And I respect and admire the fact that there are places where us and AFA can cooperate and work together.
And do.
Yeah, and do. But I firmly believe that having a entity singularly focused on the Space Force is the best way to go.
And Space Force Guardians. The thing is that how many airmen are there that are part of the Department of the Air Force, roughly?
Yeah, it's north of 300,000, 350, 330, 350 sticks out in my head.
Okay. And so if we're thinking about Space Force Guardians, we're talking, give or take 16,000, right? Yeah. And that includes the civilian Guardians as well. Right. I mean, just based on the numbers, on the numbers, I'd have to say that, if you were to take numbers, Guardians are just a really small sliver. Mm-hmm. they need somebody to talk on their behalf, to advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. So the size of the Air Force side of the department just is gigantic compared to the size of the Space Force side of the department. The budget of the Air Force side of the department is gigantic compared to the Space Force side. Is it possible to advocate for both, fairly equally? I think so, but I'll go back to what General Hyten said when he was the commander of STRATCOM, that on his very best day, space was his number 3 priority because he had nuclear mission and defense of the homeland mission. So he was the former commander of Air Force Space Command. He's considered, one of the, greats of creating the Space Force. And he admitted that space was his number 3 at best. And so inside the department, whatever the intention is, whatever good intentions there might be, you can't escape the fact that the Air Force side of the department just dwarfs the Space Force. And so you've got to have someone that can step outside of the department's overall equities and speak specifically to space power, the Space Force, and its guardians, and not worry about agitating somebody on the air side.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for clearing that up for everybody. Yeah. And we now have run out of time.
Sure.
And you will be back on soon for sure. So,
I'd love to. Yeah.
So Damon, thank you so much for making the time to come on the podcast.
Thanks, Laura. And have a great rest of your day.
If you want to learn more about the Space Force Association or the Space Power Conference, go to ussfa.org. Now we're going to talk about numbers and the space and defense policy in the just passed budget bill. This is the traditional annual budget for 2026, and the top line number for the Space Force is just over $26 billion. Here's my conversation with the Aerospace Industry Association's Vice President of Space Systems, Steve Jordan Tomaszewski. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the Downlink Podcast.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Now, just to start us off, this week should have been a wee bit more exciting, right? On Tuesday, the federal budget for this year finally passed the Senate and the House, and that bill includes defense appropriations, which is why you and I are getting together. But what we're really looking forward to, we were looking forward to, was the Artemis II launch. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you look at it, during the wet rehearsal, engineers found a liquid hydrogen leak that's associated with the rocket's core stage. And that is what rehearsals are for. But what that means is we have to wait at least a month until that mission flies. And why should we care? Well, the Artemis II mission, the launch of it will be the first time in more than 50 years that the United States, or Earth, will be sending humans beyond low Earth orbit and into deep space. So, Steve, before we get to the defense space budget, how important is the Artemis II mission for space exploration and possibly also for securing our national interests in space?
Laura, this is going to be a huge mission, not only for the United States, but for all of humanity. This is going to be an inspirational event. And I think what you're about to see when the astronauts are going to be going around the moon is all of humanity coming together and seeing what's possible when we work together. And something that I think doesn't always hit the top of the headlines, but it's very important, is this is a NASA-directed mission with a lot of international partners, but also with a lot of partners from industry. There's a lot of companies that have been contributing to the hundreds of thousands of parts and the years of development to make this successful. So this is going to be a great achievement for industry and then all of humanity.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the astronauts are going out beyond the moon so that they go around the moon, which means that they would ostensibly go the furthest out from Earth than ever before. Is that right?
Exactly. This is going to be a new record for people getting the farthest away from Earth and the farthest into deep space that we've ever done. So the closest that we had before this was the Apollo 13 mission. But the profile for this mission is just going to be testing out systems around Earth, doing a lap around the moon, and then coming back safely. But it will be a great achievement to have that new milestone of pushing people further into the solar system that we've ever gone before.
All right. And so, why is this important for securing U.S. interests in space? Just before we move on into U.S. interests in space.
Well, we learn a lot whenever we do exploration. And it doesn't only have kind of the inspirational message, but it advances industry. It allows for new technologies to be developed. There's also some pieces here, even though this is going to be from NASA, there's going to be spin off technologies that can be used for national security. We're going to be pushing the limits of different scientific endeavors like different biological experiments. So there'll be some great things that we're going to be learning from this mission. And it's really going to set us up for success to eventually land on the moon in a couple of years, establish a lunar outpost, and then after that, put people on the surface of Mars.
And the reason why I mentioned defense is because there was that recent presidential executive order that did talk about space superiority, and securing our interests in cislunar was part of it. But because we have so little time and so much to talk about, let's make this simple. We just got a budget passed, right? And that includes the defense budget. So if you could give us any kind of headline, write one for us to describe what's in that budget for space and security, what would that headline be? Right. And once you give us that headline, we'll take a little bit of time to unpack it. So yeah, what's your headline, Steve?
Steady funding with a boost.
Okay. Steady funding. All right. What's steady?
So, just to recap where we are is we just got the fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills, almost all appropriations bills passed for this fiscal year. This is coming off the heels of a government shutdown that was back in October and November, and then a partial government shutdown that happened kind of over this past weekend. But with the most of the appropriations bills going through, we see steady funding for defense and for national security space. The top line for the Space Force ended up being $26.1 billion. And while that does not encompass all national security space spending, as individual military services have their own funding for different types of military equipment, it also doesn't count things like in the national intelligence program and military intelligence program for certain space-based remote sensing capabilities. But that $26.1 billion for the Space Force is a good, steady indicator that there's continued support for national security space that's needed by the joint force.
Okay. And so what's the boost?
The boost comes from the reconciliation. So last summer when
you're
we
going to
had
be reaching back to the summertime. I thought the boost was going to be in this budget. All right, clean it up. What's the boost? Just so we can remind everybody what's happened in the recent past.
Well, and it's not over yet, right? So when the reconciliation package was passed last summer, that included about $150 billion for defense spending. Of that, there was a small set that was focused on space initiatives to include Golden Dome for America related activities, which there's going to be large space components of that. But we still haven't seen all of that money spent out yet. And between the administration working on getting Congress detailed funding plans with that, that will keep coming down and getting into actual contracts to get new capabilities online. But it's not over yet.
And just to clarify, and please do tell me if I have the numbers wrong, what's in the current bill for the Space Force is roughly $26 billion. And that from the big, beautiful budget bill, that's about 13.6 $26 billion. And the estimations that I have seen, that I have understood, that kind of rounds out to be about $40 billion. But a lot of that plus up goes for Golden Dome capabilities, which, to wit, we haven't really seen a lot on, and Congress has put into the language of the bill that they haven't seen a whole lot on it either, and that they're a bit grumpy and they're putting deadlines on reporting and stuff like that. The other number that I've seen is that for all the things that you just mentioned, like the space capabilities that are in the intelligence community or with other branches of the military, like the Navy or the Army, I don't think the Marines have space, but I could be wrong. I know they have astronauts. But that all told, in this bill that passed this week, that it's $30 billion, give or take. Is that right?
That's definitely in the ballpark, and it really also just depends on how you count this sometimes.
Right.
And one example I'll just highlight is that there was a slight downtick in the Space Force's budget for user equipment for global positioning system satellites, for positioning, navigation, and timing. But all of that is actually part of the structure of the evolution of some of these capabilities. In this example, the Space Force initially was going to do some of that research and development and kind of risk reduction on some of those new devices and new antennas. But then it's up to each service to put those on top of a tank, on top of a ship, on top of an aircraft. So part of that is the natural cycle of the Space Force kind of getting things going and then passing it off to the other services. And what's clear in this budget is that all of the services are critically dependent on space capabilities to do all of the missions that are assigned to them, and will be going forward. Space really is enabling a lot of things to happen. And then we also have new missions that are coming online from space that have never been done before. One example of that, and something that is a little bit tricky to follow in this budget, is the ground moving target indication system, where you have satellites that are looking down at the ground to track a large number of objects using radar. That used to only be done by aircraft, and now they're trying to get more space-based capabilities onto that. So we saw a little bit of back and forth here between Congress and the administration of what that's called. It's been called long-range kill chains. It seems like the ground moving target indicator is the term that Congress is currently performing, but that's also going to be something to watch as the reconciliation spending gets down to some more detail, and then what we're going to anticipate to see here when we see the fiscal year 2027 president's budget request.
You are not kidding. And that is actually a really interesting program that there's just not a whole lot of eyesight on, right? But hey, you represent an industry group, right? The Aerospace Industries Association, or AIA. How will industry read this bill, right? The Space Force traditional budget, right? We just said it was $26 billion. We've just went over the big, beautiful budget bill act. But, what are the important messages? What does this bill really say about where industry should invest to meet the demand signal?
That's a great question. And the first thing that industry wants is that clear, consistent demand signal for the government. When companies are looking to make their own investments into new technologies and trying to bring on new capabilities online, the better informed they are of where the government wants to go, that gives them some predictability and allows them to either get outside investors or to make their own internal investments into new technologies to be prepared for that next potential contract from the government. So with all of this, there's that clear message still that steady funding with an extra boost that industry is going to be excited about. There's a lot of different parts about if you want to unpack the Space Force's budget of kind of consistency across programs. There's always going to be a little give and take with how programs are managed. But then additional factors like government shutdowns and continuing resolutions also to have an impact of program management sometimes. So the best thing that the government can do is do what they did this week of actually getting full appropriations bills across the board. And it's already not too early to start talking about how the fiscal year 2027 appropriations bills are going to be manifesting themselves. And then I think we're also expecting later this year the National Defense Authorization Act to have a fiscal year 2027 addition. So the more predictability and consistency the government can have for some of these programs, the better it is for industry.
All right, we're going to talk about 2027 in just a few minutes. But when I'm, looking at this bill and trying to dig through, and then also, checking out my colleagues' work, God bless them for doing so much work indeed. But I do have to say that, there are a lot of mixed signals going on, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if you think about, GPS denied environments and the programs associated with that, and you mentioned something about GPS earlier, right? There seems to be about 50 million to explore commercial position, navigation, and timing services, right? So that's one. And this is also just in millions. This is not the billions that we keep hearing about. And then there's, 15 million to continue the development of resilient GPS-based systems, which I'd kind of figured that whatever you build, you'd want it to be resilient anyway. But it also seemed like the Department of the Air Force, which oversees the Space Force, has moved to discontinue resilient GPS. So I have to say that as an observer, I'm kind of confused.
Well, I think you actually hit on two big themes of this budget and two things that your listeners should be aware of. First, this is a big year for positioning, navigation, and timing. So with the GPS satellites being kind of the biggest component of that, this budget actually added two GPS-3 follow-on spacecraft to what the initial request was, and that's a big deal. That's $500 million for those two satellites to be added to the procurement side of the budget. And then, as you mentioned, adding that resilient GPS element back in, I think if we take a step back there, Congress wants to make sure that we have positioning, navigation, and timing services for military uses, even in potentially denied environments. And you want to not only have your primary system, but you also want to have backup systems. So even though the dollar amounts might not be the same for some of those other kind of nascent efforts, it's a very strong signal that this is going to be a continuing a line of effort. And the other piece that you also touched on there is the addition of commercial services. So there was about $130 billion added by Congress from the initial president's budget request for commercial services dealing with space. And it was a whole number of different pieces and parts there. One of them was positioning, navigation, and timing. You also saw things like surveillance, reconnaissance, and tracking, which is analytics that use space-based remote sensing assets. And then you also saw space domain awareness services added in there. So all of those are a big signal from Congress to continuing to explore some of the great capabilities coming from the commercial space sector these days. And that's where they're kind of landing inside the budget.
The other thing that I also saw, at least as a theme when it comes to the commercial sector, is that appropriators really want competition. They don't want to see sole source contracts. And I noticed that MILNET, which is a SpaceX proposed proliferated low Earth orbit communications network, this has not launched, this has not been built, has not been sorted out, but it's a proposal. And that appropriators said no to the MILNET idea or the MILNET approach because they want to have multiple companies and they don't just want a single source contract. They also don't want a single source, period. And am I wrong in how I'm reading that?
I think a big theme, and this is not necessarily unique to space, but from
Sure.
this budget is really wanting to make sure that you have a robust industrial base and a robust defense industrial base. And some of the ways that you can do that is if you do structure contracts or if you do structure procurement opportunities where you can have multiple vendors being selected. Now, that's really not a one-size-fits-all approach. There could be certain circumstances based on the technology or based on the capability where procurement officials really need to have that flexibility to make the right choice for their program at the right time. But one of the big themes that you see here is that growth of the industrial base. I would also mention that from that space superiority executive order that came out last December, there were about 6 different mentions of industrial base and supply chain. So that being a really big deal for the executive branch. The budget shows that's still a big deal for Congress here. And also for space, we're right in that spot where we are proliferating constellations, right? Where we're getting potentially in some cases thousands of satellites, where it used to only be a handful. We have a lot more launch vehicles coming online, which is just making space more accessible. And I also, want to say that on the manufacturing side, there should be some more attention being paid to where those bottlenecks and where those breakpoints are. AIA, we're releasing a study next month talking about some of those top supply chain challenges, also with some recommendations of what the government and investors could do to alleviate some of those.
All right. Well, we'll be looking out for that report. But hey, guess what? We have run out of time. So I am going to do something completely mean and unfair. And you have to roll with it. But you've got 60 seconds to tell me, A, what's in this bill that takes care of the seed corn, that's RDT&E, or research, development, test, and evaluation, which is a fairly anodyne way of describing the future, what's in the budget for the future. And speaking of the future, what should we take away from this budget for thinking about what's going to be online for 2027? You have 60 seconds going now.
If you take a step back and look at how the Space Force is doing research and development, it's important to point out that just over half of the Space Force's budget does fall into that category of research and development, testing, and evaluation. So the Space Force is a very technologically advanced service that is doing a lot of RDT&E. There's a number of different mission areas. Some of them we've already talked about here today. Things like ground moving target indicator that could be a game-changing capability if it's enacted from space. That's very exciting. When we're looking forward to fiscal year 2027, I think the top things to watch are going to be to see if there's going to be another reconciliation package that could potentially get passed there. I think it's going to be also very important to watch how the Golden Dome for America funding is trickling down, and then also to see how commercial services are getting integrated with the rest of the capabilities.
Steve, thank you so much for making the time to come on the Downlink podcast.
Thanks, Laura. Pleasure to be here.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavis Ships with Chris Cavis and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.